So welcome everyone to IR Talks today with Professor Aleksi Ylönen. Allow me to introduce his topic and also give a very brief description of his bio. He will be talking about regional politics in the Horn of Africa for us. Professor Ylönen obtained his PhD from the Autonomous University of Madrid in 2011. He conducts research for the Center for International Studies, University Institute of Lisbon, on the project in which he monitors politics and peace and conflict issues in the Horn of Africa. Also a member of the African Studies Group of the Autonomous University of Madrid, he has held academic positions and taught extensively in several universities and higher education institutions in Europe and Africa. Dr. Ylönen, his research focuses on various aspects of politics and international relations of the greater Horn of Africa. He is currently co-editing Routledge Handbook of the Horn of Africa and working on a volume discussing international dimensions of the region's current political dynamics. Some of Dr. Ylönen's recent publications include Positivism or Understanding, the complexity of analyzing the objectives of armed opposition groups, published in Critical Review in 2021, The Dragon and the Horn, Reflections on China-Africa Strategic Relations, published in Inside on Africa in 2020, and an edited volume, The Horn of Africa Since the 1960s, published by Routledge in 2017. Professor Ylönen, thank you very much for joining us today. If you have any slides you'd like to share, you can do so now. We look forward to your talk.
Okay, thank you very much, Eliza. Yes, I have slides. Let me just start from here. Okay, can you see them? Or not yet? Okay,
not yet.
Okay. Perhaps, let me just share my screen. I forgot to do that. I believe now we should be in better hands.
Perfect.
Okay. So thank you very much again for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. And today I will be talking about the regional politics in the Horn of Africa. So what I plan to do is introduce what this region or sub-region of the Horn of Africa first, after which I would like to then go on and talk about the regional politics, which of course are relatively complex, as those of you might know who are a bit knowledgeable of this area. So let me just start by looking at Horn of Africa itself. Here you can see the map, of course. The Horn of Africa is the easternmost tip of Africa, and it's very much well surrounded by the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea in the east side of it. The Horn of Africa is, of course, sometimes you might find texts in which the Horn of Africa is described as a peninsula, but this is of course a little bit disputable, which depending on how you look at what the peninsula actually is. But in a strict sense, the Horn of Africa consists of Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, and Djibouti, and which is really the tip of the continent. In a broader sense, oftentimes we would add the neighboring states, Sudan, South Sudan, and Kenya, and possibly Uganda as well to this area or region. It's quite interesting that although the Horn of Africa, and especially its coastal states, have historical and cultural important roots in the Arabian Peninsula as well, and connections to the Arabian Peninsula as well, it is some geographers, I suppose, who came up with this idea that the Horn of Africa would be, you know, surrounded by the sea and be the African side of that. These interconnections to the Arabian Peninsula and beyond are important and have been there for a long time. So in this sense, the Horn of Africa is very much connected to the world beyond. The Horn of Africa, in terms of international organizations, is of course the seat of the African Union in Addis Ababa, in the capital of Ethiopia. It is also the seat of the IGAD, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, which is a sub-regional organization in the Horn of Africa, which is based mainly in Djibouti. But in that sense, the Horn of Africa is an important region from African perspective. And it is, however, also very troubled region in terms of armed conflict, for example, separatism, secessionism, and so forth. It's one of the focal points of that in Africa, and it's relatively unstable region, has been for quite some time, and partly because of external intervention, but also partly because of the states themselves and the governance structures, the way the states are organized themselves. Most Horn of African states are highly authoritarian, but at the same time, they are relatively fragile states. They have very little power, even in their own territories. And this is one of the important features that these states in the region actually have. Now, I wanted to just take a closer look at the states themselves before going to the actual regional aspects of politics. So if we look at Ethiopia, Ethiopia is really the central state or the central polity in order for us to understand the Horn of Africa in itself. It is sort of a highland, historically highland empire, particularly in terms of Aksum and beyond, the Abyssinian Empire, which actually, especially in terms of Aksum was a very powerful state at the time of its reign. It was also extended influence in southern Arabian Peninsula. It controlled the maritime trade in its region. It had linkages to other empires such as the Roman Empire and so forth at the time. So Ethiopia has that rich imperial history. Ethiopia was never colonized. Ethiopians are very proud of that. It was occupied by Italy very briefly during World War II for about 4 or 5 years, but it has never been truly colonized. It is also the most populous state in this region, and it is somewhere along 115 million people right now, which is also very populous for African, generally speaking, in Africa. So Ethiopia has also always had sort of a dense highland populations, which have been really part of the reason why it has been an imperial power historically as well. So it has been able to draw on its population and also its agrarian economy of the highlands. Ethiopia also has maintained a sustained level of economic growth for probably about 2 decades now. It has been very, very high level of growth, and largely this was credited to this model of developmental state by the EPRDF and the TPLF government that used to be in power. Then, of course, one of the important features of Ethiopian state and Ethiopian polity throughout its history, if we look at all the way to the medieval times and so forth, has been this issue of centralization versus regionalism. Ethiopia has very strong ethnic regions in terms of in linguistic terms, cultural terms, and historically also in military terms. So there have been these forces of centralization, state building historically. And it is very interesting because these forces are at play still today. And even in the crux of the instability and the political dynamics that we have in Ethiopia right now have to do with forces that try to centralize power and regional forces. I will go back to that a bit more later as well. Ethiopia has been focused on its territorial integrity and also sea access in its regional relations for a long time. As we can see even today, Ethiopia is a landlocked state. It doesn't have a coastline. And you can see that historically Ethiopia has been trying to maintain access to the sea, especially to the Red Sea, for a long time. This is also part of its foreign policy and its regional relations even today, securing sea access. Yeah, and another issue is, of course, the territorial integrity, which has to do with this difficulty of centralizing forces and regional forces, because some of the regional forces have also historically been secessionist and wanted to leave the state, or basically have their own establish their own and not be incorporated into Ethiopia. Now, there is a certain self-perception by the ruling forces in Ethiopia historically and even up to today, at least until the TPLF rule, which was sort of this idea that Ethiopia is sort of a bastion of Christianity, highlands in the middle of sort of encirclement of Muslim lowlands around the Horn of Africa, and that it would have to secure this position and be the sort of the messenger of this old Christian tradition that it has there. And this is still a mentality that is there there in Ethiopia. So some of the traditional threat scenarios that Ethiopia has had is sort of this idea of Arab encroachment, especially in the context of the Eritrean liberation struggle from the 1960s to early 1990s, which led, of course, to independence of Ethiopia and Eritrea. Sorry. And of course, Eritrea was very much seen as a sort of a friend of Arab interests and so forth. Of course, another traditional threat scenario is strong Somalia, and one could say that this is why Ethiopia is very much involved in Somalia in many ways and has been for quite some time, to maintain Somalia, so to speak, manageable, if you will. So these are some of the issues what Ethiopia is feeling. Let me turn into Eritrea. I try to be quick here. So Eritrea actually was born ultimately from Italian dominion or Italian colonialism, but there's also Ottoman influence from before, especially from the 16th century, when there was Ottoman control of Massawa port and some of the lands in the area. Of course, Eritrea was under Ethiopian domination from the 1950s, when Ethiopia was basically given the right to annex Eritrea as one of its regions, and then finally it actually took Eritrea as or converted it into a province, which was now sort of the final final drop for Eritrean elites who rebelled and started the liberation war in early 1960s. Eritrea is often called the so-called rogue state, or North Korea. Well, I spelled it wrong there. North Korea of the Horn of Africa, because it is very much a state that came out of rebellion. It is the state that was founded by the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, and the leadership of that rebel movement or liberation movement is still the leadership of the state of Eritrea today, led by Isaias Afewerki. So here we have a state which is very much based on this liberation mentality, also very much based on the ideology, which was largely Marxist ideology of liberation, and is largely still maintained today in the state politics within Eritrea. And this, of course, has put Eritrea into a confrontation to a large extent with Western interests, in particular in the Horn of Africa, and also because of its sort of aggressive foreign policy in the 90s, especially, it got, but also to the 2000s, it was given these names. Now, since its independence, it fought a brief war with Yemen over the Hanish Islands in the Red Sea. Then a major war against Ethiopia, which it basically lost, and also a border conflict with Djibouti in 2008. Eritrea, to a large extent, or Eritrean leadership, seems to find itself as a sort of a counterweight, or present itself as a counterweight to Ethiopia's influence in the Horn of Africa. And it sort of tries to punch above its weight in terms of it's a very small state in terms of population, as well in terms of resources. It's nowhere comparable to Ethiopia, but it of course has a strategic coastal line, and it has tried to sort of undermine Ethiopia and become sort of an important state for quite a long time. This partly explains Eritrea's involvement in Somalia in the mid 2000s, for which it was sanctioned internationally and so forth, because it was actually trying to undermine Ethiopia, but apparently it was supporting also terrorist movements, although this is sort of, to a certain extent, disputable how extensive this support was, because it was very brief and sort of an attempt to put counterweight to Ethiopia again. But it was sanctioned for that. And now, of course, in the latest conflict within Ethiopia, the Tigray War, Eritrea has been very, very actively involved. And this is of course, some analysts would see this as a result of Isaias Afewerki's Eritrean president's attempt to still punch above Eritrea's weight, and try to sort of influence Ethiopian political dynamics and especially to do away with the TPLF, which was the party in power in Ethiopia until the ascent of Abiy Ahmed government. So Eritrea has had a sort of a long-term relationship, of course, because of its strategic coastline. Half of its population is Muslim. It has had very, very close relations with various Arab powers throughout time. Iran, also Saudi Arabia, the UAE. So it is interestingly observer to the Arab League, and it's also a member of the Red Sea Council. This relatively recent development, which hasn't really come to much yet, but it is Saudi Arabia led development or a forum for the Red Sea coastal countries to cooperate. Now, of course, Somalia is important to think about when we think about the Horn of Africa. If we would say that Ethiopia is central to understanding the Horn of Africa, Somalia is also important in that regard. Historically, it was a seat of great sultanates, regionally important states of Adal and Ifat, for example, seaports such as Zeila and also Mogadishu, for example, and others. The Somalilands were colonized by various powers. So unlike Ethiopia, it was quite different. For example, Djibouti, which is largely Somali based state, even today, was of course colonized by French. The northern part of today's Somalia, which we call Somaliland, of course, was colonized by the British. And then the remaining Somalia, which is the federal Somalia of today, was colonized by Italians. And prior to this, of course, there was Ottoman influence again, also in this, although also in this region, although very briefly in the 19th century, but there was. Now, Somalia gained independence in 1960, and it gave very soon after there was the union of the former British Somaliland with the former Italian Somaliland. So Somalia was a combination of the two. It was a voluntary union. 9 years after, Siad Barre took power and Somalia became a military dictatorship. It pursued very aggressive regional policy for Greater Somalia. There was in the early 60s or mid 60s, there was a war in northern Kenya, which was an irredentist war to join Somalis who were living in Kenya in those northern Kenya, northern lands to Somalia. That failed. There was also then later on, there was the Ogaden War, which was another irredentist conflict in which Somalia sought to annex eastern Ethiopia to Somalia, again with the same idea that to join the Somali people who are living in Ethiopia as part of Somalia. Somalis were not very happy when Djibouti decided in 1977 to become independent and not join Somalia, although there was quite a lot of course, Somali influence at the same time. Now, after the Ogaden War, which was also part of the great power politics of the Cold War, the clan-based armed opposition basically won the war. And with that, we had the establishment of Somaliland as an independent state, self-declared independent state. Somaliland has not been recognized by, formally recognized by any state in the world, but it exists basically as a state of its own. And this was sort of the outcome of the Somali national movement's struggle against Siad Barre regime in the end. It was one of those armed movements that contributed to winning the war against the Barre regime and then declared independence. Now, in terms of, if we look at Somalia after 1990 or 91, we can really see that this is one of the states which has been probably most significantly and intensively intervened on by other powers in the region and even beyond the region, even in terms of Africa. It's one of the major ones. There were UN missions which tried to sort of deal with the statelessness in Somalia, which was basically a warlord state at the time in the early 90s. Both missions, UNOSOM 1 and 2, largely failed. And the early 2000s, we had in Somalia a rise of Islamist governance through Islamist courts or Islamic Courts Union, which then took power. And at that time, Ethiopia, as we said before, Ethiopia is threatened by sort of political Islam, and at the same time, it is threatened by these surrounding Muslim lands. And remember that Somalia also invaded Ethiopia as part of the Ogaden War in the 70s. So Ethiopia felt it needed to invade Somalia in 2006, 2007 to actually try to back up transitional federal government in Somalia, which was a UN supported government that was first in exile and then later moved into Somalia, but it had very little power there because the warlords were largely first in power, and then after that the Islamic courts. But Ethiopia wanted to support this government. Right at the end of Ethiopian invasion and disbandment of the Islamic Courts Union, AMISOM hybrid mission, the UN and African Union hybrid mission was put in place, which is still there, trying to build peace and state in Somalia. So this is what we have. Somalia is a host to proxy actors, outside interests which are supporting certain actors within Somalia. It's quite a complex landscape in that way. Of course, we would have Ethiopia. Eritrea used to be present, not anymore, but both used to support their own proxies in Somalia. The Gulf powers as well. We would have, especially now, recently, we would have the UAE having been particularly interested, Qatar on the other side, and of course Turkey from 2011 onwards, when Turkey entered Somalia in a humanitarian mission initially, but became an important partner to the Somali government, and actually has been supporting the state building efforts there, although they haven't been very successful, as we know right now. Turkey has also become an important commercial and economic partner of Somalia. to a large extent. So we have these various proxy actors that are pulling in different directions. For example, we have actors. Yeah, I probably should have put there Kenya as well. Kenya, which also invaded Somalia from the south and then became part of the AMISOM. And of course, Kenya is supporting the Jubaland regional government in the south. Ethiopia is very much supporting the federal government. UAE has also been supporting regional forces rather than the central government. Well, somehow been balancing in between. There are reports also that there are external actors, some of which have been supporting or at least collaborating to a certain extent with Al-Shabaab, which is of course the armed opposition, the Islamist armed opposition movement, and classified as a terrorist movement internationally speaking as well, which has been fighting the central government. And some of the external actors have been involved with this group as well. So this is what we have, very complex situation. Somalia, at the same time, it's members of all the important international organizations, and regionally speaking, it's also part of course, the AU, IGAD, Arab League, Organization of African Conference, and Organization of Islamic Conference, and the Red Sea Council as well. Now, if we look at I'm starting to run late in time, so let me just look at Djibouti very quickly, and then go into a little bit more of the regional dimensions of the regional politics and the hot topics right now. So Djibouti, of course, would be the last one of the strictly speaking Horn of African countries. And of course, I don't have time today to talk about Sudan too much or South Sudan and so forth. So let me just have Djibouti as the last state. Of course, Djibouti came about under French domination, French colony. It got independence in 1977, but it still has strong linkages with France. It's very strategically important, small place, but as you can see from that map that I have there, you can see that Djibouti occupies basically the narrowest stretch of the Red Sea, and where the Red Sea meets the Indian Ocean. So it's very strategically important, because these straits, which are called Bab al-Mandab, actually through these straits, even today, we have a big part of world trade that actually goes through, especially in terms of oil, other important resources that transit through there. And Djibouti in this way is a very sort of strategic place. And this is the reason why, the main reason why it's also a host to strategic interests of great powers and regional powers. And Djibouti government has actually decided to take advantage of this geographical situation or position by hosting military bases. So it has become a host of plethora of military bases. There are various EU forces there. Of course, importantly, there is the AFRICOM, the US Africa Command. So the most important military base that US has on the continent is in Djibouti. There are other powers as well. Japan is there. And the important newcomer is, of course, China. And the Chinese naval support base that is there now. And this is, of course, not very happy moment for the for Americans, because of course Chinese are too close for comfort. I will say a few words about that too. Now, of course, for Djibouti itself, this has been very lucrative, adventure, and at the same time, selling its strategic position for logistically for ports, to the UAE, later to the Chinese after there was a dispute, and Djibouti seemed to prefer China over UAE as a strategic partner. So it maintains very close relationship also with Ethiopia, because it is the main Ethiopian port. So Ethiopia's sea access comes through Djibouti, and this has cemented a very between the two. Some of you might know that there was a railway also built from a new railway built between Addis Ababa and Djibouti, the port of Dorale in Djibouti, which caters for Ethiopia and Ethiopian markets, of course. Think about 115 million people, developing fast, high levels of economic growth. So this will be a major market, right? Major market for whoever can access it. Now, I said it before, but Djibouti is the seat of the IGAD. So of course, and it has played a mediating role in the Somalia crisis. Of course, it has that connection with Somalia in terms of Somali population and so forth. So it has been an important player there. And it is a member of these regional organizations, largely the same ones as Somalia itself. Now, if we think about the regional politics from this perspective that we have these states that I just mentioned, if we think about the Cold War politics, the Horn of Africa was given the name of a bad neighborhood because it was very prevalently used for proxy wars by the important powers, especially the two leading powers, the US and the Soviet Union, but also regional powers or what we would call perhaps middle powers. So we would have the competition between the Americans and the Soviets. We would also have the competition that arising from Arab-Israeli conflict. So Israel was trying to sort of push its influence in this region. And at the same time, Arab powers were trying to do the same. The local states or the states of the region were using these competitions that they could see from external powers for their own interest, of course. So the governments were changing alliances when it seemed to be convenient, and so forth. So they were really using this for their own benefit. There was certain understanding of Muslim solidarity arising from the Arab powers, which were interested in the region. They also wanted to pursue sort of a breadbasket policy. If you think about particularly the states of the Arabian Peninsula, how poor they are in terms of farmland. They don't really have significant food production because of sandy soils and so forth. So there was this idea to turn the Horn of Africa into a breadbasket, particularly Sudan, but this also didn't work very well in the 70s and so forth. There's also the rising conservative and radical religious influences and interpretations, which largely came from Saudi Arabia in terms of Salafism, Wahhabism, if we want to call Wahhabism. But anyway, these influences have been very strong, and of course they were linked at certain point of time to radicalism, and especially violent form of radical Islam or political Islam in this region. Sudan wanted to be a sort of a beacon of this kind of political Islam, and in the early 90s, and it actually pushed that kind of agenda, and it really affected the regional politics in Ethiopia and Eritrea, which were sort of confronting Sudan in this when it was trying to push this agenda. And of course, when we think about the war on terror, so the turn of the millennium and the war of terror, this made Ethiopia particularly sort of a natural US ally, because of course, a lot of the war on terror was waged against what the so-called terrorist groups that are now largely related to somehow to radical forms of political Islam, right? So Ethiopia, largely Christian state, claiming to be sort of the bastion of Christianity, also became a sort of an important ally of the US and its operations in the region. So Djibouti and Ethiopia have been important bulwarks for the US interests. Now, external interests are largely, you could categorize them into three. They're about resources, they're about strategy or strategic or political aspects, and economic aspects. So in terms of resources in this region, we could talk about natural and human resources. Of course, especially in terms of natural resources, we'll see interests in oil, interest in gas, minerals, and also land, fertile land in this region, which external powers would love to get access to and exploit. Another one is human resources, and as we can see, for example, the migrational flows, especially from the Horn of Africa towards the Gulf states, and the exploitation of that labor in the Gulf by the Gulf monarchies as well is an important aspect. Then we have the strategic aspects, of course, security and stability. Here we have the war on terror, of course, the American approach. We would have Iran, which was very involved in the region, but was sort of kicked out in this context of after the Arab Spring, and in this context of the Yemen war in Yemen, when many of the states started to align more with the Gulf Cooperation Council states. And then, of course, we have the issue of revolutions, which is, of course, if you look at the Gulf monarchies again, they have certain level of fear when they look at the Horn of Africa, because they consider the Horn of Africa as their sort of neighborhood. And if they could see something like Arab Spring spreading there, revolution spreading there, what happened in Sudan, this is, of course, there is a fear that this could resonate into their own states. So they do worry about this. So there is this security or stability aspect, which is important. And then, of course, Somalia, stateless society where there was a long period of sort of without central state. Now there is a federal state, but it's still very, very weak, as we can see what's happening there today. And now, economically, this is a lucrative, rising region. In terms of investment, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of finding markets and gaining economic influence and political influence, this region is very important for external powers. So let me just, this is my last slide, so I don't talk too long, but I wanted to look at some of the current hot topics in the regional politics. One of them is, of course, the intensification of particularly the Gulf Cooperation Council states in the Horn of Africa. I talked a little bit about the Arab Spring, of course, and there is this middle power competition between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Of course, we have, in the context of the Gulf Cooperation Council crisis, we also have sort of a movement in which we have Saudi Arabia and the UAE at one side and Qatar and Turkey on the other side in this region, pursuing very different kinds of approaches towards these local states in this region. Then, of course, we have the increasing Chinese political and economic involvement, which is important part of its strategic Belt and Road Initiative, right? And this is one of the key areas, especially Djibouti is seen as one of the key ports of this Belt and Road Initiative. And this is, of course, pits China largely against the US, although Chinese approach is very much economic, but it's also political. And the US approach being very much security based. But like I told you before, Americans are not looking at this in very, very good eyes. And they noticed that they have lost an opportunity already in terms of economic investment in this region. They haven't really pushed for that. Their approach has been very much security oriented, and they might have to pay the price, so to speak, for this. Then we have Ethiopian assertion in the Nile hydropolitics, and this is another important factor here. Egypt has been the dominant party on the Nile historically. It is a national security issue to secure the Nile waters for Egypt. And Ethiopia has been rising, becoming a rising power in this Nile hydropolitics with the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. And this is one of the hot topics at the moment, especially between Egypt and Ethiopia, and it also involves Sudan. And then finally, we have two more aspects that I find as important hot topics that we should all follow in the region. One of them is, of course, the transition of power in Ethiopia. What will actually happen in Ethiopia? We have the Ethiopia-Eritrea alliance right now. And of course, this alliance is the central government of Ethiopia and Eritrea fighting largely against Tigray, with some of the local allies, Amhara, for example. Now, the TPLF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, is still a force to be reckoned with in Tigray, in that area of the state. And this comes down again to this battle between centralism and ethnic federalism. TPLF is the great proponent of ethnic federalism and wants to still see strong regionalism within Ethiopia, while the central government is looking at certain level of centralism, perhaps not as strong as the Haile Selassie imperial times, but somewhere stronger than it is today. And this is, of course, an ongoing issue. And then finally, we have Somalia and Somalia peace and state building. Where are we going to go? We have, of course, terrorism as one of the big issues here. We have federalism. Somalia wants, or Somalian government wants to build a federal state. What kind of federalism will it be in the end? It is still not strong enough to be determined. Of course, the regional leaders in the federal regions want very strong powers for those regions. And then, of course, we have independentism arising from Somaliland, and Somaliland actually being the most stable and most functioning state within the bigger federal Somalia. It is actually very much independent state of its own, but it has not been internationally recognized. So let me finish here. As you can see, very complex politics, but I would actually like to hear your views and your questions if you'd like me to elaborate on something and so forth. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Professor Ylönen. We already have a couple of hands up. Just for the ease of us seeing each other, do you think it would be possible to stop sharing? Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. And another note would be the fact that classes by and large resume around 1:30. So some of our students will be able to stay. If they don't have class, others will have to leave, but I'm sure they, just like me, they also very much appreciate your presentation. So I have a couple of hands up at the moment, and I would like the students to identify themselves. First, Elif Biber.
Hi, Professor Ylönen. Thank you so much for being here with us and giving us this presentation. I am Elif. I'm a senior international relations student, and at the moment I'm conducting research on Somalia and how US conducted many drone strikes without sometimes Somalia's consent and targeting Al-Shabaab's senior members. So my question is, do you think that US drone strikes in Somalia targeting key Al-Shabaab members were really related to US's counterterrorism strategies, or did they have a different sub-motive? Like sometimes Somalia is not participating in those strikes, and maybe sometimes they don't have the consent, but they cannot say that we didn't have consent. They don't have the ability to admit that. So do you think that there's a sub-motive that pushes US to continue with the drone strikes in the region, or do you think that it is really the continuation of the war on terror?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, so yes, you can see it in various ways. But what I would say is that there has been very strong theory that we can see that throughout all this time that Al-Shabaab has been active. I think many analysts would actually agree with me when I would say that there was a very good possibility that Al-Shabaab could have been eradicated and ended, but it was not done. And you know where I'm getting at here, it seems that this sort of an approach of using drone strikes, it is known that it will not really lead to the end of Al-Shabaab. It will allow certain level of degree of punishing it whenever that is convenient. You could, to a certain extent, you could weaken it, of course, if you are able to target its leadership, and they would have to, come up with new leadership again, and what has happened in the past. So there might be ways of doing that, but there is a strong argument also to say that there is an interest to have this thing going on because the AFRICOM needs a budget, right, to continue. And it's very convenient for the US military to justify its own budget with the existence of Al-Shabaab. Perhaps also portraying it as stronger than it really is, right? So that's what I could say about that. Related to the drone strikes. I hope that helps you, helps to answer some of your questions.
Thank you so much for your answer.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. Ali?
Hello. Do you hear me well, clearly? Okay. I'm a senior student of international relations, and my question is on a little bit on the political economy of the region, especially development within these horn states. So among the 4 states that you introduced to us, it seems Ethiopia is the one that shows continuous growth and so on. And when we look what varies between these 4 states, it is the colonial background, it seems like. But I want to know about the dynamics of it. I mean, why Eritrea, Somalia, and Djibouti is not growing like Ethiopia, and what can they do to at least match Ethiopian economic power?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Very, very good question, but it's a big question again. Of course. And Prof is showing something there, a paper there. I don't know if she, yeah, I think she also wanted to maybe intervene, but yeah. Let me just say that one of the important issue in terms of economic growth and reception of on investment and so forth is stability, right? And I think that's the key word here. If we look at Ethiopia, Ethiopia was perceived as really the most stable state throughout the TPLF rule, right? And now, of course, very recently, we have this increasing instability, at least in the regions in Ethiopia. And curiously enough, we can also see that Ethiopian economic growth rate has dramatically dropped. In the context of this, of course, we have the COVID-19 pandemic at the same time. We have to remember that. But at the same time, we have really sort of investors are looking at Ethiopia now with slightly different eyes. There was a lot of hope with when Abiy Ahmed came to power with this idea of liberalization, and that it would even create even a bigger economic bonanza than there was. But actually, right now, with all this political instability that we have because of the conflicts, actually the Ethiopian economy has much grimmer short-term prospects, short-term projections. Now, that said, I would say that in terms of, if you think about Djibouti, for example, what I tried to say there is that Djibouti has been very successful in gaining external investment or foreign direct investment through this policy of military bases and ports. And it's a small country, so it has also been stable, and it has also actually grown in a quite high levels, but not quite as high as Ethiopia, but quite high levels. And I don't see that it really has significant problems in at least attracting some more investment in the near future. The only problem that I see with the Djiboutian economy is that it is highly, but very highly indebted to China right now. It has a very high external debt to China. And there have been people actually suggesting that this might compromise Djiboutian sovereignty at some point in time, because it becomes sort of a vassal of China to a certain extent. And when we think about this debt, and at the same time we think about the extent of Chinese influence currently in Djibouti, we can sort of put 2 and 2 together and see, yes, there seems to be there seems to be a correlation here, right? Now, if we think about Eritrea, Eritrea has the issue of course, it was very much as a rogue state, internationally looked at. You know, nobody would really want, in their right mind, would really want to invest there because your investment might just go somewhere, you know. But there has been some low-level investment, especially by parties who don't want to make a big number of it, because Eritrea is still looked as a sort of a rogue state. So it's not a good thing necessarily to be seen to be investing in Eritrea. But there are some, for example, some mining companies are there. There are some, especially in the ports. The ports have been quite a big interest, especially for the UAE in this context of war in Yemen. But not only the UAE, other powers as well have wanted to invest there. Eritrea is also trying to, you know, draw in some money through its external relations, which it's playing very sort of sometimes very skillfully, because it seems to be aligning with some parties, but then it also maintains relations with others at the same time. One of them is Israel, for example, that Eritrea has been maintaining relatively close relations with, while at the same time dealing with some of the Arab states. So it's quite interesting how it's trying to deal with this, but it hasn't really been able to get too much external investment. And then Somalia, very slowly, or very slowly coming up a state, which is sort of, the federal state is still very weak. It is not really, you know, in charge of its own territory. It doesn't really have much political influence in its regions, especially in Jubaland and Puntland. This is a very difficult situation. But some external powers have ventured in and invested. Of course, you know, because you're studying this, that Turkey is there. Turkey is an important one in that regard. There's actually a recent joint venture, I think, to explore oil as well by Americans and Turkish together, I understood as well. So there is some investment, but this doesn't really translate into high levels of economic growth, at least in formal economy, because there's so little control by the state. One could say that Somalia is sort of booming economically, but it doesn't really, the formal numbers are not there, you know, because, yeah, who knows, right? So it's sort of, yeah. So that's the case with that. I think that was all the countries that you wanted to ask about. So yeah, thanks.
Great. Ali, I see you have your hand up again. Is it?
Oh no, it's a previous hand. I forgot to lower it.
Okay, not a problem. Professor Budai, would you like to ask? Thank you for joining us, first of all.
Oh, thank you very much. I think Ecem was first. Should we let her go first?
Yes, my bad. I don't have the list of who raised what when.
Okay, I'll go after Ecem.
Thank you. My name is Ecem Güvercin, and I'm a second-year student in Bilkent University. Actually, my question is more like a prediction, and I would like to ask for your opinion. Well, since the EU and United States also talked about some project against the Belt and Road Initiative in Africa, I was actually thinking about that there will be a bit rivalry in Africa as well. So my question is that, would actually China have a more distant stance towards Eritrea in order to gain support in other African countries because of the Eritrea's relations with the other countries? And if so, I would like to ask that if it will affect further relations between China and Turkey. Thank you so much.
Okay, I didn't get everything very clearly, but I think it was about the Chinese influence. How is it seen in Africa from African perspective, or its influence in Africa and then Turkey and China?
I'm sorry, my connection is quite bad, so I would like to repeat it again. Well, I would like to ask that in order to increase support the Belt and Road Initiative because of the possible rivalry also from the launch project from the US and EU, I actually would like to ask that if the China would basically sacrifice the relationship between Eritrea in order to gain other African countries' support, or if they would like to do that, would the relationships between China and Turkey would affect because Turkey also supports Eritrea in the region? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, okay, now I got it. So a Chinese approach is quite interesting. It really seems to look at certain states as its key partners in Africa. And it can compromise relations with others or treat them as secondary when it is sure that it has good relations with those key partners. It seems to be that there has been this kind of guiding line. This seems to be particularly, you can see it in the Horn of Africa, where, you know, China seems to look at some of the states that it sees as stable and with powerful ruling or powerful government or powerful enough government or ruling elite that it can deal with. If it sees that that's not the case, those countries normally becomes its secondary partners from where it basically wants to extract resources. So if we look at, for example, this region, Ethiopia is a key partner, and China would not want to compromise relations with Ethiopia in this regard. Djibouti is another key partner. Djibouti is, of course, has a very small economic weight, but it has a very important strategic weight for China. So China is very interested in maintaining that as well. Is it willing to compromise on other relations with other states to maintain, for instance, these relationships? Yeah, I think it is, if it has to, but it wouldn't want to. And we can see, for example, Chinese approach towards Somaliland was very interesting because Somaliland didn't want anything to do with China and actually forged relations with Taiwan. And we can see how China was really pushing for relations with Somaliland for strategic reasons. Somaliland is not an important economy for China, but it is, again, it might be an interesting strategic partner. So it was trying to do that, but it has noticed that it couldn't. So it has actually let it be, at least for the time being. And concentrated more on, for example, trying to build relations with Somalia. I mean, the federal Somalia. So it's basically, it sort of illustrates part of this approach that China has. Did I answer, did you have another part of question, or did I answer it?
Thank you so much. It was a very nice answer, I think.
Okay, you're welcome.
Great. Professor Budai?
Thank you so much, Professor Ylönen. I just wanted to thank you for the wonderful talk and just maybe give you initially a kind of like a context of our department, and then just a minor question. I don't know if that question even has an answer. But my name is Anastasia Vodai. I teach here at the Department of International Relations, and I teach, one of the courses that I teach is on African politics and conflict. And yes, and the Horn of Africa, what I noticed is has always been this fascinating, absolutely fascinating territory and region. And maybe, I don't know if this was said before, I joined a little bit later, but a lot of the students that you've seen today and some of those who ask you questions actually took classes in Africa, and they were really also interested in Horn of Africa. So, so there is a little bit of a context here. Oh. And I've always found Horn of Africa fascinating for myself. My area of research is more into international terrorism, but more kind of towards Nigeria and that piece of territory in Boko Haram. But Africa, Horn of Africa has always seemed like this interesting characters even. So if you talk about Haile Selassie, right, the emperor, the king of all kings, or even Siad Bar or Afwerki and everybody there, and Haile Selassie shooting his lions after the apparent coup attempt in 1960s is a fascinating region. And my small question here, and as I said, I don't know if there is an answer to that, but as you said, there has been kind of this Marxist liberationist movement in Eritrea, and they've been fighting for many decades against Ethiopia. And then, of course, Isaiah Afwerki comes out of this as this leader, right? And everybody expects him to be more kind of maybe on the lines of Ho Chi Minh, even like the creation of a more democratic, more free state. And then he kind of turns towards more dictatorial. And it seems right now that he's kind of more of a one-man show. I don't know if that could be describe him well, but my question would be, what do you think would happen to particularly Eritrea? Because he's 75, which is young for Sub-Saharan Africa. But nevertheless, I mean, he is 75. And so maybe in 10 years time, what do you think? I mean, what do you see happening to Eritrea when he is gone and he is just this one man holding it together? It seems, at least for now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for giving the context too. And I'm very happy to see that people were so many who came to listen. So there is a lot of interest in Africa. So I'm very happy to hear this. Yeah. Now, in terms of Eritrea and possible transition at some point in time, this is of course a big question. Yes, I think you are right when you are saying that power is very much concentrated into a very small clique of people in that country. I would still be a bit wary to calling it a one man, because there is a body, well, not even a body. We can count it single-handedly, but few people who are the leading figures in the regime below him, right? And who have certain level of influence. They have certain level of power. And what I'm saying is that something similar to what happened perhaps in Cuba just now could perhaps take place if he passes power. There might be that possibility. But since Eritrean politics is so obscure, it's very hard for us to say, right? You know that very well, I think. So it's very hard for us to say what would happen. To what extent? I think another key point would be to what extent would the security service, the security apparatus, the army comply with any new leader or any leader that would come after him? Would they support that person in full? If they would, I think there might be some level of continuity of this. What kind of continuity it would be, it might also be something that might change to a certain extent, but but there might be sort of more orderly transition. But there's also the chance of it becoming sort of a revolutionary transition, and seeing that there might be maybe looking at something what happened in Sudan might take place. But I think the other key factor there is, of course, the security services and the security apparatus. How do they react in any such change?
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Fantastic. Ahmed, next.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Ahmed. I'm the master's student. I would like to ask a question about inter-organizational relations in the Horn of Africa. Given that NATO and the EU conduct simultaneous separate operations with the similar mandates, what is the nature of their relations, whether they are in competition or cooperation? What do you think about it?
Yeah. Okay, can you just repeat the actors again? NATO and
EU,
sorry,
European Union. NATO and European Union.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, this is an important question, of course. European Union as a security actor in terms of external security and as a hard power actor is basically still in the making. European Union would act as a hard power only, I would say, still through the interests of those states that have an interest in Africa and in certain places in Africa, which would be now, let's say, France. Well, used to be Britain, now we have Brexit, so that's gone. But in terms of soft power, of course, Germany is an important player in Africa, actually more important than often, even from African perspective, is actually looked at. But it is actually important soft power. So the EU as a sort of a cohesive actor in Africa is still somehow at a loss, to be honest. Then we have NATO. So NATO, of course, is a security actor. And now NATO, the NATO powers in Europe are sometimes, in my understanding at least, able to sway NATO to also to perform certain operations in Africa when it's in their interest. But of course, it requires the US interest in that as the probably the main player in the NATO. Well, the main player in the NATO. So I would see, let's say if we have France intervening somewhere, yes, it could do it in sort of in a name of the EU, but at the same time, it is doing it for unilateral interests to a large extent. If we think about Operación Serval, for example, in Mali, or some of the other operations that France has made. So, and then of course, in terms of NATO intervention, if we think about Libya, for example, that was very much, there was an important American interest to get that done, right? So, there is a certain level of complexity, and I would say that certain level of confusion also amongst the players themselves. How this, when can we say that something is an EU operation, or when is it a sort of a unilateral operation by some of these parties? Of course, it's nice to mask it as an EU operation. Let's say France wants to do something, and then they say, no, it's not us throwing our weight around. It's EU operation, right? But we know who the actor really is behind it, right? Oftentimes. So this tends to happen quite a lot in Africa. I think that's pretty much all I can really say about that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Prof? I believe Rana was next.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Hi, Aleksi. How are you? It is very nice to see you and welcome you here at our departmental seminar. And it was a very great talk, including many details in African Horn of African states. So I have a particular question regarding the relationship between Ethiopia and Turkey. So right now, Turkey has become the second biggest investor in Ethiopia. So as far as I research, and so it seems that after Somalia, Turkey is right now try to, let's say, shift its focus on Ethiopia. And regarding political relations, and Turkey also tries to be, let's say, influential on the political side of the relationship between Ethiopia and Somalia, to push for kind of an alliance between them. And because you also touched upon this issue, how the relations are quite fragile between Ethiopia and Somalia. So my question will be kind of, let's say, much more related to Turkey's position and how it can affect the balance of power in the Horn of Africa with regard to relations between Ethiopia, Somalia, and Turkey. So do you think that is the risk for stabilization, or is the risk for security in the near future? Yeah, thanks a lot again.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, that was a very interesting point and question you are posing about Turkey's role in the Horn of Africa, and it has been so Somalia based, well, to a certain extent Sudan based too, right? Sudan and Somalia based, but I think you're exactly right. What you're saying, that Turkey has had growing interest in Ethiopia, and this interest, my understanding is, has to do also with this realization in Turkey that Ethiopia seems to be sort of a source of stability, and seems to be sort of a regional, if not regional hegemon. There isn't actually a debate about this among scholars, if Ethiopia is or if it's not. But I would say, from my perspective, I would say that it's a dominant state, but it's probably not, it doesn't amount to be a hegemon. But anyway, I think there's a growing realization in Turkey also, and in Turkey's foreign policy, that there should be an important collaboration with Ethiopia in terms of influence in this region, right? And Ethiopia is, of course, like I said, it's an up and coming market. It's attractive in that sense. So I'm not surprised that Turkish investment is so important part right now. But it's also part of sort of an economic statecraft, if you will, or economic diplomacy to a certain extent, that I think for Abiy Ahmed government, this is a very useful source of income, a very useful, very welcome step. They would not say no. And to that extent, I think Turkey has had certain level of persuasion when Abiy Ahmed has gone on his peace mission in Somalia, and has been trying to especially mediate between Somaliland and Somalia proper, right? And this has been interesting to see, and I would say that Turkey has a certain role there to play behind Ethiopia, so to speak, and also on its own, but those particular negotiations are very difficult, because Somaliland sees itself as an independent state, and it actually is working very well as an independent state. It is actually one of the most stable states in the whole region. It is actually at the moment, you could say that it's probably more stable than even Ethiopia at the moment, you know? So they don't really have interest to rejoin Somalia when they feel that they are in certain ways different, even culturally different, although they are Somali people, but they feel that they are coming from a certain British colonial tradition, which is different from Italian, and that they have a much more organized way of doing things, and also caring for their security. I think that those negotiations in which Turkey has tried to play in which Ethiopia has tried to play in which the European Union and the Americans have tried to be playing in, is a very difficult one, if not even a complete dead end, to be honest. I think, and this is a personal opinion, my personal opinion, because I know Somaliland quite well. My personal opinion is that I think the international powers should start to make the realization, especially after all these years, that Somaliland should probably be recognized as an independent state.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you know, it has a very strong claim for independence legally and historically, and you could argue that its claim is even stronger than South Sudan. So to a large extent, it's a kind of a tragedy for Somalilanders that they haven't gained that independence. But yeah, but that's of course also from my personal perspective, knowing Somaliland. You know, other people might have very different view, looking at it from the perspective of federal Somalia, right? So there is two points of view for sure. So this went a little bit into the Somalia discussion, but yeah, I think Turkey definitely has a role to play politically. It has a role to play as a mediator if it wants to. I think it has that space in the Horn of Africa, especially in the current. I mean, meaning that there are so many sort of tensions and conflict situations that you know, in many of them, I think Turkey could play a positive role, to be honest. Let me just finish by saying that the only thing here probably is that the Gulf Cooperation Council states, the leading ones, especially Saudi Arabia and the UAE, would not like to see that too much, right? Because they feel, or their leaderships feel, that Turkey is a competing actor in the region. But also, from my understanding, from Turkey's perspective, Turkey doesn't see itself so much as a competing actor, but more as a development actor and sort of a positive bringing something positive to the Horn of Africa. So yeah, so that might also be one dynamic to think about.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have a couple more questions. Is it okay if we go a little bit past our regular, so it's 2 o'clock, 2:02 right now. Is it okay for you, Professor Ylönen?
Yeah, it's fine with me. Maybe 2 more questions. It's fine, no problem. Yeah.
So Rawan, would you like to go?
Thank you, Hocam. Thank you for this wonderful talk. I'm a senior student at Bilkent University. My supervisor for the senior project is with us, Rana Hoca, and I'm also a student of Professor Boyday and an ex-student of Elisa Hoca. I've had the entire package. So my question is the following. In our project, we identified 2 issues with Ethiopia's development program, which are the lack of human capital and political instability. So for the political instability bit, we were discussing the issue of Tigray conflict and how it could mark the end of the development success story so far. And reading other analysts, they've been very pessimistic about the political solutions that could be reached, especially given the hegemonic tendencies of political parties in Ethiopia. And others took evidence of Chinese approachment of other countries, including Djibouti at this stage, as a sign that this is the end of the primacy of Ethiopia. So I'd like to know your thoughts about this issue and whether there's a way to cut losses and go back on the development as previously, even though that separating the effect of the pandemic is a bit hard from the effect of the conflict, but it's very clear given the humanitarian crisis that they're suffering right now and the infrastructure damage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The sort of the impact of the Tigray crisis. Yeah, you are very right when you listen to different analysts and experts on this particular conflict, or analysts and experts on Ethiopia, that many of them and most of them, or us, would say that this is a very difficult situation, and that there has been sort of a downhill movement because of this crisis. It is true. The economy has really suffered, and moving away from this developmental state model into a liberal capitalist economy, which apparently the current leadership wants to move towards, is a difficult one also because it will require structural changes in the economy that are very, very deep, and it will take time to get those done. And when you have a culture, how would we say, economic culture of sort of centralized planning and sort of a Marxist ideology in that, it is very difficult to change that overnight. And we could see that, for example, we can think about Eastern Europe. If you think about Eastern Europe after with the fall of the Soviet Union, you can see that this is a time-consuming transition, right? At the same time, we have a leadership in Ethiopia which has not been fully consolidated. It just got power very recently, right? And it is trying to consolidate its own power. So some analysts accuse this leadership of being too centralist, that it is actually trying to forge its way through, and it will try to create something like Haile Selassie did, or the Derg during the communist period. But at the same time, it is unclear if that is really the case, because at least from the rhetoric of the leadership, it does not want to do that, but it wants some sort of a midway solution in which it would want to especially weaken ethno-nationalist forces or ethnic nationalist forces. And the main one that you have in Ethiopia basically is the TPLF, right? So there is this political dynamic in which the leadership tries to build a sort of a stronger federal state, but stronger federal state built in some sort of unity. But it is very unclear sort of how it would happen. And then at the same time, you have ethno-nationalist forces drawing away from that and try to maintain a system that now the central government is trying to sort of break and move forward from. And TPLF is the main proponent of maintaining that old system. So I would say that in terms of economic growth, and this is of course a very difficult situation, because right now you don't really know which direction Ethiopia will be going. It seems that the central government is moving one way, but it has so much resistance that we can't really see it happening anytime soon. So whatever change there is going to be will take time, and that means that there will be a certain level of instability. The elections are supposed to be coming very soon, and now that would be a one way of, again, for Abiy Ahmed to justify his power. But what we know right now is that those elections might be very difficult to conduct, and there might be only a very small proportion of the population which would actually vote. So how legitimate would they be? So there are a lot of question marks in this exact moment, how Ethiopia will go forward. This Tigray situation is going to continue. I mean, it's not going to go away. It will going to continue at least for quite some time. TPLF is still a powerful actor in Tigray, and it also has not only a certain level of military power, but it also has political influence. That's not going to go away in a very short term. You can't just snap your fingers and say it's going to go away, right? And at the same time, now we could ask, is TPLF going to be strong enough to actually sort of overturn the government successes, military successes, and so forth, and become even a greater force? It's hard to say. For the moment, in the regional scenario, it seems that it has very little chance of really becoming much stronger actor. But then at the same time, it becoming much weaker actor is not going to also happen overnight. So this is, of course, destabilizing. And this will have economic impact on Ethiopia, and this economic impact can actually be relatively prolonged. I would say, though, that if the Tigray crisis is sort of contained in a certain area, it might not still be destabilize the whole state of Ethiopia, because Ethiopia throughout time, as you can see if you read Ethiopian history, throughout time, Ethiopia has always had peripheral instability in its territories and conflicts, even armed conflicts. But the central state has still sort of gone on with its business, you know? So it's very hard to say to what extent this will destabilize the economy, the political system. Will it even overturn the political system? There are many question marks. It's hard to say.
Thank you.
Yeah, but, yeah.
So can I, okay. We're going to finish first with a question from Professor Shahin. Professor Shahin.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a little interview. Sorry about this.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
It's not easy these days. So my question is about the debt issue. Well, among many other important points you have raised today, the debt problem in debt to China, regional states debt to China is a key factor in understanding the regional states' relations with China. I'm curious about your views, your comments on the effects of this debt issue on the relations between the regional states and other actors like the US or France in the context of Djibouti. How this debt is affecting the regional states' ability to act as a foreign policy actor, and how this debt how is that also affecting the US and French response or policy towards the region?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, very, very good question. And this is another one of, I would say, in which people speculate quite a lot because there is really no sort of hard evidence what would happen and so forth. But you know, in the region there has been a lot of talk about this, and especially with Chinese role and the debt issue. In Djibouti, Djibouti has been looked at in Africa as a sort of a, how would we say, example of what might happen, but sort of a wait and see. Let's see what happens in the near future with Djibouti. We can already see that there is a very important Chinese influence. Is it related to the debt completely? Because China has also invested a lot there, but is it only the debt? Is it also other things? It's hard to say, but those are likely to contribute to it for sure. Now, we have other states in Kenya is also looking into this because it's also developing a quite important debt with China, and other states too around Africa. Now, there has been a lot of talk in Africa about what happened, for example, in Sri Lanka, with apparently China confiscating assets in return for in return of non-payment, and because there is a realization in Africa that many of these countries will never pay back these debts, and there is also that same realization in China. By the way, Chinese know that many of these debts will never be paid back, and but they have used them in order to gain certain level of influence, right? So they're trying to do that. To what extent does that actually translate into real influence in terms of being able to control the behavior of these states? That is harder to say. That is harder to say because many of these arrangements are bilateral. They're also very obscure. There are contracts that are not really released to the general public and internationally either. So nobody doesn't really know what's behind there. And there is, of course, one thing here is that in the end of the day, or at the end of the day, the actual assets and infrastructure that China has actually put in place are on soil of those states, right? Isn't it? You know, to what extent that means that those states still have leverage over some of them, even if they say we don't pay, right? As long as if these arrangements have been very sort of obscure, bilateral, to what extent can China then enforce? And there has been some speculation about, yeah, but China could use military force in the end and take, let's say, the port of Djibouti or the port of Mombasa or something like that. Well, yeah, that's again something that's hard to say. And of course, in some parts of Africa, US is an important security actor. Would the Americans now come to aid to their most important allies and say, no, you can't do this? Would this be yet another confrontation? A lot of speculation, but I would say that this is another issue of sort of wait and see, because I also sense that there is a growing sentiment among population in various African countries, which is becoming to feel Chinese as a bit less wanted partner. But this is arising from the grassroots and people's opinions about the Chinese. It's very interesting. There has been a bit of, in some countries you can see sort of anti-Chinese sentiment coming because of these high debts, and because it will eventually have a repercussions of people themselves, right? People themselves will have to maybe pay higher taxes or whatever to pay back Chinese loans, right? And so there is a certain growing, I would argue, a growing sentiment of actually being a bit more critical about China and what it's actually doing. Now, to what extent will this translate into international relations? We'll have to also see. But there's definitely this kind of sentiment also among people themselves, a population. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
Fantastic. So unless there are any other questions, and I'll pause here for a few seconds to let people raise their hands if they want to. Well, since there aren't any hands up, then I would like to thank you for a fantastic talk, Professor Ylönen, and to to extend our invitation for an in-person visit whenever the international travel situation comes back to normal. We would love to host you here. We've learned a lot from this talk. It was very interesting, and we hope to see you soon.
Yes. Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you. It was very, very nice. I was very happy to see also so many students joining, friends joining, new friends hopefully joining, and yes, I would be more than happy to come and join you for any other event, just informally, and come and see you. And really, I would love to also us to maybe collaborate in the future in Africa related things. It would really be wonderful. I think there is a lot from the Turkish perspective. Also, there's a lot of interest in Africa. I know that, and from your own research perspectives, I think there's many of you who are also very interested. So I think, yeah, I think we can definitely build on this.
Wonderful. Just a quick note, today we broke the record, not just for the longest talk of the semester so far, which shows the interest of our participants, but also the youngest participant, who is Aslan, and who was waiting and I have no doubt he will become an expert in African politics, and that his interest will only grow.
Yes, very good.
Thank you so much once again. It was wonderful to listen to your listen to your lecture and to your talk, and wish you all the best and a lot of luck in all your endeavors, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Same to you and same to everyone. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Aleksi.
Yeah. Yes.
Bye.
Thanks.